Ethan lived in a small, high-rise apartment on the edge of New Austin, a city that had grown faster than anyone imagined after the first humans made contact with aliens. Among the many new arrivals, his roommate, Leora, was the first true alien he had shared living space with. She had arrived months ago as part of a cultural exchange program, and he had volunteered to help her adjust to Earth life. At first, everything seemed normal. They shared meals, joked about the weirdness of grocery stores, and Ethan even helped her learn slang and gestures that humans used without thinking. But lately, something had changed. Leora had become distant. She would sit in her corner, quietly, drawing intricate symbols that Ethan didn't understand. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was polite but short. Ethan felt a growing ache in his chest. He missed the connection they had shared, the small moments of laughter and curiosity. He wondered if she missed him at all, or if she had simply decided Earth life was boring compared to the wonders she left behind. It was a rainy Thursday evening when the accident happened. Ethan had gone to the kitchen to grab some tea, hoping the warmth might soothe his restless thoughts. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, an unusual mistake on Leora's part, since she was normally careful about privacy. He didn't mean to peek, but the light spilling out drew his eyes for a fraction of a second. And then he saw her form. It was unlike anything he had expected. Her body was fluid and luminous, shifting colors that seemed to reflect her thoughts. She didn't have a human shape, not really. Limbs were elongated in ways that defied Earth biology, and her skin shimmered faintly, almost like liquid glass. For a heartbeat, Ethan froze. The surprise hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't imagined this side of her at all, and yet it wasn't frightening. Somehow, it was beautiful. He blinked, a sudden flush of guilt rising in his chest. This wasn't a moment to stare. Quickly, he turned away, muttering a clumsy apology even though she couldn't hear him. Still, the image lingered in his mind. For all her differences, she seemed vulnerable. Human vulnerability was familiar, but seeing it in her alien form reminded him that no matter how advanced or strange she was, she had feelings, fears, and perhaps even loneliness just like him. Later that night, he sat on his couch, staring at the empty space where she slept. Ethan thought about the distance growing between them, not just in physical space, but in understanding. He wanted to talk to her, to bridge the gap, but he didn't know how. Words often failed him, especially when the other person came from a world that obeyed completely different rules. He remembered something he had read in an old anthropology book. Humans have a unique ability to empathize, to reach across cultures, species, even lifetimes, and connect in ways that seem impossible. At first, Ethan decided that if anyone could bridge the gap between human and alien, it had to be a human. He owed it to her, and to himself, to try. The next morning, he prepared breakfast for the first time in weeks, hoping to create a small gesture of goodwill. He laid out a simple meal: eggs, toast, and some fresh fruit, Earth-style comfort food. When Leora emerged, she paused, scanning the room. For a moment, she looked surprised, and then there was a flicker of what he thought might be gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying the musical undertone that humans had trouble mimicking. Ethan smiled, feeling a small spark of hope. I thought maybe we could talk, or just sit together for a while." Leora hesitated. Her translucent eyes studied him, and he could see the shifting colors across her skin, a subtle language he didn't fully understand. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, sit." They ate in silence at first, but Ethan didn't mind. Silence could be comforting too, especially when shared. After a while, he found himself asking questions, not just the practical ones about her life, but personal ones. He asked about the stars she remembered from home, about the songs she missed, about the small details that made her smile. Leora began to respond, slowly at first, and then with more ease. She shared stories of her homeworld, of floating gardens, and cities that glowed under two suns. Ethan listened, fascinated, and sometimes interrupted with laughter or amazement. He realized that despite the vast differences between their worlds, their curiosity, humor, and wonder were the same. Hours passed. The rain stopped, and as evening approached, Ethan felt a connection rekindling. Maybe it wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was something new, something deeper. He realized that distance didn't have to mean disconnection. Humans could adapt, persist, and care in ways that crossed boundaries that seemed insurmountable. That was their strength. That was HFY. Later, as Leora returned to her corner, Ethan cleaned up the dishes. He smiled to himself, thinking about the morning's accident and the strange beauty he had witnessed. Seeing her form had been unexpected, yes, but it had reminded him that empathy, curiosity, and courage were more important than fear or embarrassment. And in that moment, he understood something essential. He didn't have to fully understand her to care. The very act of trying, of reaching out, of sharing small human gestures, was enough to rebuild a bridge across worlds. As he finally went to bed, he whispered a quiet thought. Tomorrow, he would try again. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not all at once, but he would try. For Leora, for the friendship they were learning to rebuild, and for the small, messy, beautiful heart of humanity that could reach even across the stars. And as sleep took him, Ethan knew this. The distance between them could be crossed step by step, gesture by gesture, heart by heart. And perhaps someday, the memory of that accidental glance, seeing her form not as he expected, would become the spark that reminded them both why human courage and empathy could shine even in the darkest unknown. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft hum of the city outside his window. Rain had left tiny rivers running along the streets, reflecting neon signs and the pale light of early dawn. He stretched and glanced at the empty side of the bed where Leora usually slept. She was already gone, moving through her own strange schedule, one he barely understood. The quiet left him feeling hollow. Their breakfast yesterday had been a small success, a bridge across the distance, but now the empty apartment reminded him of how fragile that connection still was. He wanted to speak with her, to share something human, but the words felt heavy, too easy to stumble over. He decided to go for a walk. Walking helped him think. The city had changed so much, with alien arrivals, flying vehicles, now shared lanes. With traditional cars, holographic signs advertised products in languages he couldn't read, and alien scents mixed with familiar smells from bakeries and coffee shops. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of worlds colliding. And yet, walking among the chaos, Ethan felt a pang of sadness. He had never expected to miss someone so deeply before. With humans, distance was measurable miles, phone calls, letters. But with Leora, it was more than that. Her world and his didn't line up perfectly. Her mind worked differently, her senses were heightened, and her idea of time wasn't quite the same. He missed her presence in a way he had never felt before. He stopped near a small park and watched children chase each other under artificial trees that glowed softly, a gift from an alien sponsor. Even in the middle of this bright, bustling city, he felt lonely. The HFY part of him, the part that refused to give up, pushed against that sadness. Humans were resilient. They could adapt. They could reach across impossible gaps and still create connection. Ethan thought about the first time he had seen Leora in her alien form. At first, he had been shocked. But now, he realized something important. Humans often judged what they did not understand. And yet, humans also had a rare ability to care anyway. That caring, that courage to reach out, was the essence of what made them strong. He wanted to show that to Leora, even if he didn't fully know how. Back in the apartment, he found Leora sitting near the window, tracing symbols in the air with her glowing fingers. They seemed like a map of stars, or perhaps a memory of her. Home. He approached carefully. "Good morning," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes reflecting shifting colors, and gave a tiny nod. "I wanted to try something," Ethan continued, hesitating. "Yesterday, breakfast worked a little. Maybe we can do something together today. Something simple, just humans things." Leora tilted her head. Her eyes scanned him, curious but cautious. Slowly, she gestured for him to sit. That small gesture felt like a victory. He decided to show her something simple, yet deeply human: painting. He pulled out brushes and a canvas he had set aside weeks ago, gathering some paints and colors that reminded him of both Earth and the alien lights she sometimes emitted. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he explained. "Just colors, feelings." She hesitated, but then dipped her fingers in paint. Her movements were slow at first, careful. But soon, the canvas became alive with shapes, spirals, and patterns he could not name. Ethan added his own strokes, blending colors where their work met. They didn't speak much, but the act of creating together built a silent bridge. Hours passed. Their canvases were a mess of color, but they laughed when paint splattered on hands or arms. Ethan noticed that Leora seemed lighter somehow, more relaxed, less distant. He realized that connection didn't always need words. Humans could reach out through gestures, patience, and shared experiences, and she was responding. Later, the next week was quiet, but alive with small victories. Ethan kept trying to reconnect with Leora, showing her human habits and gestures that were strange to her, but comforting to him. Each attempt was simple: a shared breakfast, a cup of tea, or even reading aloud a short story. Some days she engaged. Some days she remained distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. Ethan had learned patience in ways he hadn't expected. Humans were resilient not only in the face of danger, but in the face of uncertainty. Reaching out to someone who might not understand you, who came from a completely different world, was a test of heart. He could have given up. Many humans might have, but he couldn't. He cared too much. One morning, he woke to find a small note on the kitchen counter. It was written in symbols that glowed faintly, and for a moment he didn't understand. But he recognized a familiar pattern. It was her version of a thank you. She had taken the time to communicate, even in a language he didn't know. That small gesture filled him with hope. Later, he approached her carefully. "I saw your note," he said softly. "Thank you. It means a lot." Leora's colors shifted in response, brightening at the edges, and for the first time, Ethan felt a real connection in the silence. She wasn't just there physically, her presence had weight, warmth, and acknowledgement. Encouraged, Ethan decided to take another step. Humans often built bonds through shared experiences. He thought about the local science museum, a place of curiosity, imagination, and discovery. If he could show her Earth's wonders while respecting her differences, maybe they could reconnect. Further, "Leora," he asked cautiously that evening, "would you like to go somewhere tomorrow? A place full of stars, planets, and experiments. Just humans things, and maybe yours too?" She paused, her form flickering softly as if she were weighing the offer. Finally, she nodded. That tiny gesture made Ethan's chest swell with determination. Tomorrow, he thought, they would take another step toward understanding. The next day, Ethan led her through the museum, marveling at her reactions. She hovered near displays of planets and stars, pointing to ones that looked like the twin suns of her home world. She made soft sounds that Ethan interpreted as wonder and excitement. Her curiosity mirrored his own in a way that transcended their differences. Ethan shared stories about each exhibit, telling her how humans had explored the skies, sending probes and satellites far beyond their planet. Leora listened carefully, asking questions he sometimes struggled to answer. And when she did ask, he realized that humans were capable of learning from anyone, even someone whose form and mind were alien to them. At the planetarium, Ethan sat beside her as stars spun across the ceiling. He felt a quiet hope settle in. Here, in this dark room filled with light, distance didn't feel so wide. They could share silence and wonder together. He realized that even small gestures, like simply being present, could rebuild connections stronger than words alone. Afterward, they visited a hands-on experiment section. Ethan showed her how to make a simple circuit light up, and she mimicked him, her glowing fingers delicate yet precise. They laughed together when it worked, and Ethan noticed that her colors flickered in patterns. He had begun to recognize patterns that indicated trust, amusement, and comfort. On the way home, the city lights reflected in puddles along the streets. Ethan felt the distance between them shrink a little with every step. It was subtle, invisible to the world, but real. Humans could reach across differences in ways that required effort, patience, and hope. It wasn't instant, but it worked. That night, back in their apartment, Ethan reflected on what had happened. He realized that humans had a unique strength, the ability to connect despite differences. He had seen it in his friendships, in his family, and now, in the relationship he was rebuilding with Leora. HFY wasn't about fighting wars or conquering planets. It was about persisting in kindness, empathy, and courage. He found her quietly, drawing in her corner again, and he approached with a small tray of tea. "I thought maybe we could share this," he said. "Just a small thing like yesterday." She looked up, her eyes softening, and accepted. They drank in silence, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full of understanding. Even without words, Ethan could feel her trust growing, her distance shrinking. Later, he thought about the first time he had seen her alien form. At the time, he had been shocked, unsure, even embarrassed. But now, he saw it differently. That moment had shown him something essential. Humans had the ability to respond to the unknown with empathy, rather than fear. They could see someone different and still care deeply. That was HFY. That was why he didn't give up. As sleep approached, Ethan felt a quiet resolve. Tomorrow, he would try again. Another shared moment, another attempt to understand. He didn't need perfection. He needed presence, patience, and courage. Humans had a way of turning small acts into lasting bonds, and he was determined to prove that. And as he drifted off, he whispered a thought to himself. Distance could be bridged. Differences could be understood. And even when someone seemed far away, human hope, persistence, and care could reach them. Ethan didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew this. Every small gesture mattered. Every shared laugh, every moment of wonder, every attempt to connect was a step toward closing the gap. That was humanity. That was HFY. And somewhere in the quiet glow of the apartment, Leora's colors flickered gently, a silent acknowledgement that the bridge was growing stronger. Ethan woke early the next morning, determined to make another small step toward reconnecting with Leora. Their last visit to the museum had been a quiet success, but he knew that maintaining the bond would take more than curiosity and gestures. It would take patience, courage, and the willingness to meet her halfway. Humans had faced challenges before, and this was no different. When he entered the kitchen, Leora was already there, her form shifting gently as she moved. Ethan noticed her colors were more vibrant than usual, a subtle sign that she was curious, even receptive. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound confident. though his chest felt tight with anticipation. "Good morning," she replied, her voice soft. The words were simple, but the tone carried warmth. It made him smile. "I was thinking," Ethan continued, "maybe we could try something new today. Something Earth and maybe alien too. You know, to understand each other better." She tilted her head, a motion he had begun to understand as curiosity. Finally, she nodded that Ethan had an idea. He wanted to show her the city from a different perspective, one humans rarely experienced, but one that could speak to our alien senses. He borrowed a small hoverboard from a friend, a human invention that allowed a person to glide over streets safely, and promised Leora that she could try it too. At first, she hesitated, watching him move across the street with cautious amusement. "It looks unstable," she observed, her colors flickering in curiosity and doubt. "It feels unstable," Ethan admitted with a laugh, "but humans like trying things that are hard or strange. That's how we learn, and sometimes it's fun." After a moment, she agreed to try. Ethan guided her carefully, holding her hand as she hovered above the ground. The city looked different from above. The streets curved like ribbons, the lights shimmered like stars, and the rain-slicked pavement reflected everything with a surreal glow. Leora's form shimmered brighter as she moved, and Ethan realized that this was more than fun. It was trust. She was letting him lead, letting him share a small part of his human world with her. They glided through the streets, laughter and soft sounds filling the air. For Ethan, every flicker of her colors, every subtle shift in her form, was proof that they were reconnecting. Distance didn't vanish instantly, but it could shrink with persistence. Later, they stopped at a quiet rooftop. The city stretched below, alive with lights and movement. Ethan pointed to the horizon. "Humans have always looked at the sky and wondered. We build machines, rockets, satellites, anything to reach out and understand the unknown." Leora's eyes brightened as she studied him. She pointed to a constellation that reminded her of her homeworld. Then, with a gesture he was still learning to interpret, she touched his hand lightly, colors flowing across her form. It was subtle, but it felt like a bridge, a connection that words could not capture. They sat in silence for a while, absorbing the city, the sky, and each other's presence. Ethan thought about the distance he had felt before, a gap not just of space, but of understanding. He realized that humans had a rare strength. They could persist in kindness, even when the path was unclear. That strength, that courage to try despite fear and uncertainty, was what made them extraordinary. The next day brought a new challenge. Ethan had to leave the city briefly for work, a meeting with colleagues about a project that could take him out for several days. He dreaded leaving, knowing that Leora might retreat into her own world during his absence. The thought of the distance growing again made his chest tight. Before leaving, he approached her. "I'll be gone for a few days," he said carefully. "I hope we can continue our understanding when I return." Leora's colors flickered in response. She didn't speak, but the subtle gesture of her form, leaning slightly toward him, told him she cared, even if she didn't fully understand human ways of expressing it. Ethan smiled, feeling hope. Humans could adapt. They could show care in action, in presence. The days after Ethan returned from his brief trip were quiet at first. Leora moved around the apartment in her usual graceful, glowing patterns, and Ethan tried to continue the small routines that had been helping them reconnect. Breakfasts, shared tea, and even the occasional painting session became moments of subtle understanding between them. Yet, despite these small victories, Ethan could feel the distance creeping back in. Leora seemed distracted, her colors shifting in ways he couldn't always read. Some evenings, she retreated into her corner and drew strange symbols in the air, leaving him feeling alone and unsure. He sat on the couch one night, staring at the glow of her drawings. "I don't understand you sometimes," he murmured, "but I want to. I want to try." The words were half for her and half for himself. He realized that connection wasn't just about being present. It was about persistence, effort, and courage. Humans were built to care, even when understanding seemed impossible. HFY wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about never giving up, even when things felt distant or strange. The next morning, he decided to create a challenge one that could bring them closer, even if it meant stepping out of both of their comfort zones. He set up a small scavenger hunt in the apartment. Clues were written in a mix of human words and symbols he had begun to learn from Leora's language. Each clue led to something familiar: a favorite cup, a drawing, a snack she liked. When Leora discovered the first clue, her colors flickered with curiosity. She moved carefully from clue to clue, her glowing form shifting in ways that reflected amusement and engagement. Ethan followed at a distance, watching her expressions and gestures. For the first time in several days, he saw her fully present in their shared world. "This is fun," she said softly, her voice carrying the musical undertone he had grown to recognize. "I'm glad," Ethan replied. "Humans like games, and sometimes games help us understand each other better." By the time she found the final clue, she held a small note in her hand. It was simple: "Thank you." Her colors flowed brightly as she approached him, and he felt a spark of hope. Even when she didn't fully speak, even when distance seemed present, her willingness to participate was a bridge being built. Later that evening, they sat near the window. The city below hummed with life, lights reflecting off wet streets and glowing signs. Ethan poured tea for both of them and watched her take the first sip. The small gesture seemed to communicate something profound: trust, patience, and acknowledgement. Ethan spoke carefully, choosing words that felt human but meaningful. "I know it's hard. I know our worlds are different. Sometimes I feel like I can't reach you, and maybe you feel the same. But I want to keep trying, every day." Leora's colors brightened, moving in patterns he had learned to interpret. A mix of curiosity, understanding, and subtle appreciation. She didn't reply in words, but the gesture of leaning closer and letting their hands nearly touch said more than any sentence could. The following days tested Ethan's patience even further. Leora became quiet again, retreating into her alien routines and drawing patterns that made no immediate sense to him. It was frustrating, but Ethan reminded himself humans had a way of persisting, even when progress seemed slow or invisible. They had overcome long odds, faced unknown worlds, and built connections across cultures. This was no different. One evening, Ethan decided to share a story from his own childhood. He told her about a time he had been lost during a hiking trip and how he had relied on kindness from strangers to find his way back. He spoke of fear, hope, and the courage to keep going even when the path was unclear. Leora listened, her glowing color shifting slowly, reflecting thought and attention. When he finished, she gestured toward him, tracing a line in the air that connected 2 points. Ethan understood it as a symbol of journey and connection. They had started at different points from different worlds, but their paths were meeting. It was a small victory, but meaningful. Ethan realized that hope was more than a feeling. It was action. Humans had a unique ability to create bridges, to persist through uncertainty, and to care even when distance threatened to win. That was the essence of HFY. Days turned into a week, and the subtle changes in Leora became more noticeable. She began imitating small human habits without being prompted, such as offering a cup of tea to Ethan or observing the way he organized objects on the table. These gestures, simple as they were, carried trust and connection. Ethan responded with patience and encouragement, understanding that every small effort mattered. One night, Ethan looked at Leora drawing in her corner and remembered the moment. That had started everything the day he had accidentally seen her bathing. Her form had been unexpected, unfamiliar, even shocking. And yet, that moment had reminded him why he cared so much. Humanity's strength was the ability to embrace the unknown, to respond with empathy and courage rather than fear. He approached her quietly and placed a hand near hers, careful not to startle her. "I just want you to know, I care," he whispered. "I'll keep trying, no matter what." Her colors shifted brighter, a subtle pattern of acknowledgement and warmth. Ethan smiled, realizing that the gap between them had narrowed. Distance still existed, but it was no longer overwhelming. It could be crossed with patience, action, and hope. That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan felt a quiet confidence. They had faced distance, uncertainty, and difference, yet small gestures of trust and courage had brought them closer. Humans had always done this, built bridges across impossible gaps, connected with those who seemed distant, and persisted with hope and care. He closed his eyes, thinking of the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new misunderstandings, and perhaps moments of frustration. But he would continue to act with the same human spirit, persistence, empathy, and courage. Distance could not win against that dot, and in the quiet glow of the apartment, Leora's form shimmered gently, a silent acknowledgement that connection was growing stronger. Even when words failed, hope, patience, and human determination could bridge. Worlds. Ethan realized, more clearly than ever, that caring was not about immediate results. It was about showing up, trying again, and believing in the power of connection. That belief, that quiet, unyielding human spirit, was what made them remarkable. And as sleep took him, he whispered a quiet thought to himself. No matter the distance, no matter the unknown, he would keep reaching. That was humanity. That was hope. That was HFY. The next week felt unusually tense. Ethan noticed that Leora had become quieter than usual. She still moved gracefully around the apartment, but her colors were dimmer, more muted. It wasn't like the playful flickers he had grown used to. It was a subtle sign of withdrawal, a distance he couldn't quite reach. He felt the familiar ache of sadness creep in. He had tried so hard to reconnect, to bridge the gap between their worlds. Yet now it seemed like she was pulling away. Ethan sat on the couch, hands clasped, thinking. Humans had faced difficulties before, and they had always found a way through. Persistence, empathy, and hope had carried them. He had to remember that. Ethan decided to start small. He left the tray of breakfast near her corner, with familiar foods and a warm cup of tea. Alongside it, he left a note in mixed symbols. "I care. I am here." It wasn't much, but sometimes humans could communicate in gestures, even when words failed. Hours passed before Leora responded. She approached the tray cautiously, colors flickering as if uncertain. She touched the note, studied it, and then gave a tiny nod. Ethan felt relief wash over him. Even small acknowledgement was progress. Later, Ethan suggested a quiet walk. The city was unusually bright that afternoon, sunlight reflecting off wet streets from a passing shower. He walked beside her, careful not to rush. Humans understood that connection required patience. Leora seemed hesitant at first, keeping a slight distance, but gradually she allowed him to guide her through the familiar streets. They stopped at a small park where children were playing, laughter echoing through the air. Ethan pointed to the playground, then to the sky. "Humans laugh and play to share joy," he said. "It's simple, but it brings us closer." Leora observed quietly, then made a subtle gesture, extending one of her glowing hands toward him. Ethan understood immediately. It was an invitation to join her in this small moment. Together, they watched the children play, and in that simple observation, Distance began to shrink. Back in the apartment, Ethan suggested another experiment: storytelling. Humans had always connected through stories, sharing emotions and experiences to create empathy. He chose a story from Earth's history about explorers facing impossible odds to reach distant lands. He emphasized the courage, hope, and persistence. In the tale, Leora listened carefully, her colors flickering in patterns Ethan had learned to interpret: curiosity, understanding, and a hint of excitement. When he finished, she gestured toward him, drawing a line between 2 points in the air, a symbolic bridge. Ethan understood. Their worlds, different as they were, could meet in shared understanding. Yet the real challenge came the next day. Ethan had invited a friend over, a human who had shown kindness to both him and Leora before. He thought shared experiences could strengthen bonds. But when his friend arrived, Leora's form shifted sharply, colors darkening in ways Ethan hadn't seen. She hovered near her corner, avoiding interaction. Ethan felt panic rise. He had misjudged.